Years ago, I heard the phrase ordinary holiness, and I wondered what that meant. I pondered what that might mean. I didn't know as a young person if I'd ever met someone who had ordinary holiness. I thought that to be holy, you had to be somehow removed or different or special. Definitely not me. When I was a young girl, there were some people in our city who were not homeless. Our city in those times didn't have homeless people, but we did have many poor people and unfortunate people, people whose lives had not been easy, who dealt with tremendous difficulty. Sometimes they lived in boarding houses. And the people who ran the boarding houses would give them breakfast and then send them out into the streets. They weren't allowed to come home through the day. And so they would wander the street from breakfast until supper time, meeting people, talking to people, begging for money for a coffee or a cup of tea, and then sometimes ducking into a church to be warm. And that's where I met many of those people. My dad was in the choir at our church. And so coming and going with him for choir practice, sitting and listening to the choir, I met many of these people who just came to the church to be warm. One day, Dad and I were walking past the church, and we met one of the men whose name I knew. His name was Walter Morrissey. I was 6 or 7 years old, and so when we passed him, I said, "Good morning, Walter." And my dad took my shoulder, looked me in the eye, and said, "He's Mr. Morrissey to you." And even though I was very little, I knew exactly what he was telling me. This man was my elder, and I needed to give him the same respect that I would give anybody. It didn't matter that he was somewhat unfortunate, that he was poor. What mattered was that he had dignity and that he was my elder. It's a lesson I have never forgotten, and it's a lesson I learned in my family. A lesson about the dignity of elders, the respect that is their due, and the dignity of every human being. It's something that's really stuck in my mind all my life. So often, we do not accord one another the dignity that they deserve. In families, we teach every day lessons to one another. Lessons about being Christian, about being kind, about justice, about equality, about goodness, about how to treat one another. Christianity is more than a set of principles. It's a way of living. We learn the way of living in our families. Sometimes we think that our family is not good enough or perfect, that our family has struggled too much or has had pain. Those things may be true, but that does not mean that your family or mine does not still teach. We teach by the way we live our lives. When we teach one another to accord dignity, when we teach one another to speak with respect to one another, then we are teaching the ways of the gospel. We learn to live the gospel in our families. And I learned one lesson in living the gospel that day with my father, a lesson I will never forget. He's Mr. Morrissey to you.